Welcome to the Aguilar Conversations, a global perspective. I'm Tony Aguilar. Thomas Jefferson once said, "A well informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny." Yet, in the era of the Trump administration, the media faces growing challenges in how to report on his actions. Trump has repeatedly labeled the media as the enemy of the people. This rhetoric is a deliberate attempt to sow division and undermine trust, echoing tactics used by past regimes to erode public faith in institutions, ultimately making the public more susceptible to manipulation. As the media landscape becomes increasingly fragmented and disinformation spreads, public trust in the press has sharply declined. This has led to some in the media seemingly capitulating in fear of a second Trump administration. This raises an important question. Is the United States at risk of falling into the very trap Jefferson warned against, where a misinformed populace is more vulnerable to the rise of tyranny? The media and the second Trump administration. Next. Joining us today is Diana Owen, professor of political science, teaching in the Communication, Culture, and Technology graduate program at Georgetown University. Diana, first of all, welcome back. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you too.
Listen, in the context of what we're talking about today, media and the Trump administration, after 10 years, why is the media still having problems figuring out how to cover him?
I think that's a really good question. And first of all, he's a political figure like we've never seen before. And I think that the press was kind of trying things out. You're still continuing to, kind of experiment and figure out what's the best way to cover him. When he was first elected, there was a lot of outrage coverage, kind of constantly repeating, kind of nasty things that he would say or things that he would tweet. And there wasn't much substance that I particularly noticed in, particularly legacy media coverage or cable news coverage. And that seemed to work at that time. It seemed to drive up, kind of ratings, particularly among the cable networks and some of the news or papers, New York Times, Washington Post, just to constantly be opposing him and calling him out. But there wasn't a tremendous amount of, substance to a lot of what was said. It got very repetitious. And people started to become fatigued. They just really were starting to tune it out because it was just always more of the same. Oh, he said something terrible. And, now we're going to call him out on it. And it would continue that way. People weren't learning that much from the news. And it was becoming really tiresome. So, then he was sort of out of the picture, although I think his media coverage eclipsed Joe Biden's when Biden was president. And then he comes back on the scene and he's doing the same thing with his outrageous comments and whatever. But what the media is discovering is that the formula that they used during his first term wasn't really working. They were, kind of people were tuning out. People thought we've been here. It's a rehash. And so then they had to kind of figure out new ways of, kind of covering his administration now that he's elected. And I think that some media organizations have specifically outlined strategies that they're going to be using to cover him. Particularly trying to not get caught up in outrage journalism and be more substantive in the way they're, kind of tackling his issues. Some have argued that maybe the best way would be to hold him accountable to campaign promises and then kind of demonstrate, how he is or is not, kind of living up to those promises. But I still think that so much has happened within the past 2 weeks that it's almost, it's a tremendous challenge. It's almost difficult to keep up, even, kind of news organizations that have been trying to find their strategy.
There's been a couple of reports and studies that have been done. One that came out of Yale University, and this was, I think, in 2022, in which the people running the study, they took folks who looked at Fox News religiously, and they asked them not to do that and to watch CNN for a month. And what they found when the participants came back is that they reported that they were finding out things and finding out about issues that they had no knowledge of. And now, while it did not change their political ideology, which is fine, it did change how they began to view certain issues that had not been reported on through their particular medium. So, as part of the problem that some of the mainstream media is simply not getting through to people, and for whatever reason, it's unable to break through to certain segments of the population.
I would agree with that completely. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see that the audience for political media is so fragmented. People find a niche where they feel comfortable, where the messages agree with their, kind of pre-existing beliefs. And so they stick with that without kind of wanting to learn more about what's more broadly out there. And I think they're also they feel as if they're following a major news source, let's say Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, they think that they're actually doing their, kind of good, responsible citizen, kind of work by, attending to those sites. They don't necessarily understand that they may be limiting themselves by, kind of relying on something that's in an echo chamber where they're only hearing things that they want to hear. And once they branch out and they're exposed to more issues and ideas, I think that enlightens them. There's been a good amount of research that's been done on deliberative democracy, where people have been brought together and, kind of physically brought together even for a weekend or so and introduced to issues that they've never had the opportunity to explore. And here they have, kind of some time to spend with other people, share their ideas. And it has a tremendous effect. People start to say, wow, I didn't realize that, the importance of this issue and how it impacts different me and different people throughout the country. So I think that there's a lot to be said for kind of branching out and getting your news from a variety of sources. In one sense, there's the critique that the mainstream press, they always cover the same stories. So it doesn't matter where you go because you're always going to get, the same news. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I think, the study that you raised makes that point clear that, depending upon where you get your news these days, is really going to determine what kind of exposure you get to issues, events, policy perspectives, and even the key players. People who are interviewed on Fox News are very different than the people that are interviewed on MSNBC. So it does make a difference. And I would say one of the things that I've heard about how, kind of some, I'd say, kind of experienced journalists have been contemplating how to handle this particular, version of the Trump administration is to actually kind of partner more with local news and see how the policies are impacting people in different areas. I just heard yesterday, I think it was John King, who went and did a fairly long segment on CNN about how migrant labor is really helping people in Indiana, that they rely on it. And, sure, there's people that are afraid to come out of their homes. So, kind of the meat packing or farming and other industries that rely on these workers, the work isn't getting done because of the fear that's being put into it. And, this is a place that, with many Trump supporters, at the same time, they didn't quite, kind of process or understand what the implications would be to policies that they might have applauded when he was, running under those.
Well, as part of the solution, from your perspective, is that organizations such as MSNBC and CNN, whose ratings, quite frankly, have gone down quite a bit since the election, as Fox News ratings have actually increased. So, as part of that, in terms of what you're saying, in terms of creating new partnerships, but also how to increase their bandwidth and their footprint in areas where they're not necessarily seen as a legitimate source of information, but also to think about how do you become less opinion centric and more fact-based centric. I mean, is that part of the solution?
I would agree with that. I think that that's part of it, that people don't have a lot of facts. And particularly if we look at the way the coverage, kind of unfolded during the first Trump administration, it really, there wasn't a lot of, factual information that was kind of, at least in the cable news realm, that we were getting on a daily basis. The Pew Research Center and other places have done some studies of the content of news during the first Trump administration. And a lot of it, again, was this outrage journalism without much substance to it. And I don't know exactly what the strategy would be to kind of build, kind of the audience base and bring them to, kind of sources that they haven't been aligned with. Even if they shift their, kind of their focus to being more content based or serious content based. One thing I've thought about is, and I just finished writing a piece on this, is that during the campaign, we really noticed that social media, which has been increasing its importance, for since 2008 in every campaign, really played a major role in getting news to the public. It was just slightly used, just slightly less than television news. Kind of for the first time, the gap was really closing. And I think that given the fact that many people are now, and particularly younger people, are now relying heavily or even exclusively on social media to get their news, one way that news organizations might kind of introduce themselves in a new way to different audience members is to beef up their social media presence in a way that plays up the fact that they are going to become, more a source of factual news and information you can use, as opposed to just, kind of going with the the kind of catchy headline or whatever. And the other players that I think, and this I think could happen, is starting to happen as well, is podcasts and Substacks are playing a much bigger role in where, kind of people's media sources. And if, if the, kind of the way that a media organization could present itself using these alternative kinds of sources and then tie it into kind of their main, focus, which might be television, I think that could be a strategy that would work. But they definitely have to change the tone. And I've noticed it. I definitely have noticed it in terms of when, looking across the cable news outlets and, kind of online or print media sources.
Part of the issue, though, fear of retribution, because as you've noticed, I've noticed some shift in how they're speaking about this particular administration. But if you go back, because there was a lot of blowback against the owner of the LA Times, obviously
Yes.
Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post, but also when Joe and Mika went to Mar-a-Lago, there was a lot of pushback on that. So is a lot of what's going on a recognition of going a different way or perhaps fear of retribution, which is what a lot of people feel that it is. Now, having said that, publications such as the Wall Street Journal have no problems with criticizing him as they did with their editorial about his tariffs. So, but is part of the problem, particularly with the media that leans left, is that there is a fear of retribution. Even with ABC and their settling of the defamation lawsuit, which many people thought that they would have won had they stayed with it. But it seems to be a fear of not having access to the White House, which was also kind of borne out with the new Secretary of Defense in pretty much preventing, I think, NBC and certain other stations from coming into the press briefings. So is that part of the issue as well?
I think it's a big part of the issue. I think, the idea of, seeking retribution against all enemies, real and perceived, is, kind of a mainstay of the Trump administration. And his war on journalists, it has been well known. I think he's ramped it up. He has even more of these lawsuits or threats of lawsuits against media organizations are in the pipeline as we speak. And, organizations have been losing their, kind of press credentials. For example, the White House has withdrawn press credentials from, legacy media or cable news and given them to social media, the preferred podcasters and others, influencers, even TikTok creators, that they are now introducing, into their media mix because they think they're much more friendly sources. They're ones that Donald Trump actually, kind of plays well in. So the news organizations are very afraid of losing their access to the White House and to the chief newsmaker, and I think that's had a chilling effect on the news and the way that some journalists feel that they can do their job. The fact that so many journalists left the Washington Post because they felt that Jeff Bezos, when he, kind of withdrew their endorsement of Kamala Harris and said that they could not do that. And then since Donald Trump has been, kind of in office, they've, kind of had their hands tied more and more, mass exodus. And a lot of these, reporters are actually doing really well. They've had Substacks that start out with 50, 60, 100,000, subscribers right away.
Keeping with that, though, because you talked about podcasting, for example, and social media. But social media, the top folks have capitulated. Facebook, obviously X, formerly known as Twitter, Truth Social, which is not a major source, but it is, it's owned by the president and run by the president, quite frankly. So where would social media fit in this since, Mark Zuckerberg has basically said we will no longer fact check. Elon Musk is not going to critique the president, but so much. And Blue Sky is not that big yet where it can really compete. And Truth Social is what it is. It's for basically the mega group. So how do you get social media to be part of a process where there's factual and objective reporting when they're controlled by folks who are, many have said, become sycophants for this present administration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure I have a good answer because I think that, many social media sites have become much more, kind of under the guise of expressing greater freedom for expression. They've really become, much more narrow in the kind of content that they welcome. And I think I have personal friends and even myself a bit, who are hesitant to put things on Facebook. I don't have an X account, but X and other places because they feel that they'll be monitored and something, kind of, again, that retribution might occur. One platform that has been taking off, and I know this particularly because, a lot of young people go there, is LinkedIn. That's become a place where a lot of, kind of more detailed content has been shared, and it's really actually has a tremendous reach, and it seems to kind of people get recommended. It kind of has an algorithm where people have like interests are suggested, and you can kind of quickly grow a base. I think there are places. You're right about Blue Sky. It would be nice, but it just doesn't seem like it's really catching on. I think once people establish habits, I know people have said, when Zuckerberg kind of got rid of fact checking for Facebook and other things that he's done with Facebook, that, oh, I'm taking myself off. And then you see they're back on again, in short order because of the fact that it does have that ability to connect. It's easy to use. People are used to it. And, you can have a large followership that's not going to, kind of come with you to Blue Sky, even if you make that switch.
One of the things I want to bring up is the work that you've been doing at Georgetown University. And you studied the Project Citizen Research Program, where you've actually done some very interesting work in dealing with students in terms of the civic culture and civic education. And one of the results that you have found is that number one, the students that you were part of the program, because you had a control group and you had people that were actually being within the program, is that they all came with a mistrust of the government and mistrust of the press. But after going through the program and learning about civic culture and governance structures and the like, that the trust went up for those who were involved in the program. Say more about that.
Yes, well, thank you for raising Project Citizen because that to me is, a very high quality program of the Center for Civic Education. It's been around for decades, and the particular project that you're talking about was a version of Project Citizen that was adapted for high need students. So, kind of students that were at risk and kind of were not doing well in school, and also came from families that were low income and whatever. And what they start out, first of all, being very disinterested in politics, very distrusting of the system, and not knowing very much at all about, democracy, how our system works, the institutions of government. And through that program, where they identify a problem in their school or their community, and then they research the problem. They come up with a series of alternatives. They discuss them. They work in groups or as a class. They discuss them. They come up with one alternative that they, particularly want to advocate for, and then they meet with community leaders or leaders within their school, and present a portfolio of, kind of what they've learned and their alternatives. In some instances, for example, a case in Florida where a Project Citizen group tried to fix a real problem. There's a terrible traffic situation in front of the school, and kids were getting hit by cars or whatever. They researched what's the best solution to that, actually got up to the state legislature, and their solution was adopted by the state. So now all crosswalks have to have this particular configuration that they came up with. That garners trust. The fact that they also have interactions with community leaders, and they have a pathway to participation also helps them. The fact that they feel that they have a voice was something, because we also interviewed a lot of the kids to talk about what the Project Citizen meant to them. When they feel that they can have a voice, it builds trust. There's another aspect of the Project Citizen curriculum that is now being developed called Project Community, where students learn how to assess media coverage, the quality of information. And, through that process, it's interesting. They learn to discern what's fact from something that's misinformation or misleading, but it doesn't make them dislike the media. It actually builds their trust because they feel that they're empowered to make decisions about what's good and bad information, and to discern. And they learn that not everything that's put out by the media is wrong, which is, kind of where they start. So I think that learning about the process, having access to institutions, meeting with leaders, talking to people that are kind of making a difference in their communities, and having the sense that they themselves can make a difference is a big way of building trust.
One of the narratives about the media that's been out there for a while is that the media is always left leaning. And, as you look at the number of TV stations in the country, the reality is organizations like Nexstar and Sinclair Broadcasting own a significant number of TV stations, and both are would be center right. So, but it seems that the right has created a narrative that the media is overrun by the left. And so it sees itself as a victim and that it must protect itself, so forth and so on. Speak to that a little bit, because that seems to be a narrative and a myth that's out there and has been out there for a while.
Yeah, it's a major myth. And I think, kind of getting back to our original topic of the Trump, media coverage, it's a myth that he's elevated and amplified. And it really takes hold, even though, kind of reality is very much counter to that. I think, one of the beauties of our media system, our media ecosystem, is that it has perspectives represented, kind of along a wide ideological continuum. And but this idea that the media are left leaning, particularly local news, which, as you say, Sinclair and others, kind of really is kind of right center, and oftentimes repeating the same thing. If you watch a broadcast in one city, you'll see it's virtually the same in another city, and it does have that, kind of more conservative ideology. Um, I think this is something that a lot of scholars are trying to figure out. How do you counter that narrative? I mean, once it's out there, it's kind of hard because I don't think Americans really have a clear view about what conservative or liberal ideology really means. And I think that we tend to, even, as I'm a political scientist, it tends to be measured along a left-right continuum, when it's really not that way. It's much more complex than that. So people, I think, are confused about, what does it mean to be conservative? What does it mean to be liberal? And so these narratives can just get out there because there's no, kind of, the average person doesn't have a way of kind of checking that against reality. So, and also I figured that people who are experiencing, kind of watching their local news, and they, kind of watch, they'll think, oh, well, my local news, which local news usually is higher rated than, national news by a significant amount, it doesn't have that problem being left leaning, but it's everywhere else. It's like, I love my member of Congress, but I don't like the institution, that kind of thing. So I think that that's one of the reasons too why it's the narrative can keep kind of persist.
In the few moments we have left, how hopeful are you about the state of the media over the next 4 years and beyond that? Because damage can be done to the media that can go beyond 4 years. So, how hopeful are you, or how pessimistic are you?
That's a really tough question. I'd like to say that right now, looking at the first 2 weeks of, kind of legacy media coverage of the Trump administration, that it seems to be a little bit more solid than what we saw, kind of during the first administration. There is an attempt to, try and cover the issues as quickly as they're coming out. It's very hard to keep up, and to try to tone down the journalism rhetoric, and focus on what does it mean. A lot of it is extremely, complex. Like, what role does Elon Musk and Doge really play? That's something I've seen different accounts of what that is across different, kind of reliable, what I consider to be reliable sources. But at least there's an attempt to try and identify what the issues are, how they, might be addressed, and how they affect, kind of average citizens who voted, whichever way they did, because they thought that their candidate was going to work in their best interest, or that, prices would come down, or, whatever. So I guess I'm cautiously optimistic, although I do think that media organizations in general are not in good shape in terms of, kind of institutions that, are viable financially, and whatever. I think these, kind of the loss of, really important journalists by, major legacy news organizations is a big problem. I'm seeing that there's going to be more people tuning in to podcasts, high quality podcasts like your own, to try and get that information. And maybe that kind of a switch is not a bad thing, because people can focus on a topic or an issue in detail and get, kind of that deep dive that's missing from a lot of journalism as it is now. I used to feel really negative about the press, like there was no hope for it. And particularly when we started entering the new media era and entertainment started infusing media. And I thought first, well, okay, maybe this is meeting people where they are. But really, it just ended up, making the content a lot less substantive and, kind of more, kind of tabloid. But there seems to be a little bit of a backlash going on now, and maybe that, will catch on.
Us today has been Diana Owen, professor of political science in the Communication, Culture, and Technology graduate program at Georgetown University. Diana, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us today. And join us again next week here on the Aguilar Conversations, A Global Perspective.